The discoveries over the past few years have considerably improved our vision of the plant world. The closer we look at them, the more plants become familiar to us. Who would have thought, before the recent research of Ted Turling revealed it, that good old country sweet corn also uses chemical defenses, but not to repel its aggressors? When threatened, our familiar corn is so Machiavellian that it sends shivers up your spine and has inspired writers of horror and science fiction movies. Corn is regularly attacked by Spodoptera, the caterpillar of a moth that is invasive and never stops eating. Spodoptera has a predator, a little wasp called Euplectrus, whose fragile appearance hides a killer with horrifying methods. Corn knows this, and when Spodoptera attacks it, calls the killer. In the blink of an eye, the wasp injects a droplet of eggs into the caterpillar's body. The eggs quickly hatch and give birth to larvae which grow by devouring the Spodoptera from the inside out. In space, no one can hear you scream, says one of the characters in the movie Alien. Here, the wasp answers the call of the corn.
When we started this research, we thought it would be the feces of the caterpillars that is attracting these parasitic wasps. But when we started looking at this in more detail, we found that it's actually the plants that are actively starting to produce volatile compounds that form an odor that is very attractive to these parasitic wasps.
It takes a few hours for the attacked corn to produce and liberate in the surrounding air these wasp-attracting scents. Neighbors to the plant under attack perceive the warning signal and in turn reproduce it, and this signal travels to the wasps lying in ambush. These olfactive signals target caterpillars with the precision of a GPS.
Smaller plants are most vulnerable to these caterpillars. In fact, one caterpillar can completely destroy and kill one plant. So that's why the smaller plants will benefit the most from these signals. Small plants emit many more compounds, much larger quantities of these compounds than larger plants.
To test the efficiency of this defense system, corn has been genetically modified to not react when attacked by caterpillars. The result is spectacular. The field of corn that cannot call the wasps for help is eaten right down to its roots. Plants release volatile compounds specific to each pest that attacks them. And surprisingly, these airborne molecules also attract the specific predator for that pest. In this way, plants can count on wasps, but also on ladybirds and bugs which swallow up aphids in large quantities.
The more and more that we start to understand the language of plants, each different insect induces a different response in the plant, a different bouquet of volatiles. That means that they're sort of an odorous fingerprint that we can tap into. We should be able to develop sensors that can then perceive these odors and tell us what is going on with the plant.
Ted Turling's team has developed an artificial nose which identifies the principal airborne substances released by plants under attack. This prototype will be improved and reduced in size before practical field use.
And we hope that eventually we can put on robots that then go through the field, smelling the plants, and tell a farmer which plant is under attack by a caterpillar.
The fight between plants and their pests is like a never-ending series. In the game of, if you attack me, I'll call your enemy who will kill you, other insects have found surprisingly unusual answers. In this way, Ted Turing's and a Chinese team have recently discovered that little white flies, the orioles, can alter the message sent by the plants they attack.
It's one of those amazing adaptations in insects that allow them to circumvent the defenses of plants by making the plant think that they're under attack by something else. The alert message that they send out suggests that they're under attack by a pathogen and not by an insect. And that's why the neighboring plant will start defending itself against the pathogen and not against whiteflies.
Whiteflies may seem insignificant at first sight, but they attack and damage over 600 different species of plants.
So this is what they call the coevolutionary arms race between plants and insects. And obviously, in this particular case, the insects are ahead of the game. But we can expect that certain plants have already adapted to that and they launched the right defense. We haven't discovered that yet. Or that in the future, in nature, the plants that are now being fooled will have evolved different mechanisms to launch the correct defenses against whiteflies as well.
It's an intense game of chess played out between plants and insects. What's at stake is species survival, each partner being constantly forced to evolve and adapt by diversifying and improving their tactics. It's well known that birds use trees. They serve as larders, hiding places for lovemaking and for nesting. But it's far well less known that trees also use birds. As corn calls in killer wasps for help, trees infested by colonies of caterpillars call birds to their aid.
When the leaf is fully developed, they're attacked by caterpillars that are already quite large. Birds are attracted in search of food. At this moment, the large caterpillars are an important source of nutrition. But we're in a slightly different context. We're studying a lot earlier in time, at a stage when the caterpillars have only just hatched. They've started to eat the bud from the inside.
The freshly hatched caterpillars are less than 1 millimeter long. The tree must have extremely good sensors to detect their presence and send out a warning signal. Samuel Caro has built an aviary in a Y shape. At the end of one of the corridors, he places a healthy young oak tree. On the other corridor, he places a young oak tree on which he releases 20 just-hatched caterpillars. The two trees are hidden by a white cover, so they cannot be seen. Samuel places a bird in the nesting platform of the third corridor of the aviary and actions the fans which send the airborne compounds produced by the two trees toward the bird.
Off you go. Hop.
The bird takes flight and chooses one of the two trees. Samuel Caro repeats the experiment 100 times, and almost all the birds fly blindly to the oak infested with caterpillars. This isn't pure chance. The infested tree is secreting chemical compounds that signal to the birds that it has food.
These micro-scents attract the birds to zones where there is a future abundance of caterpillars. They are more prone to build their nests in the area and reproduce more, reproduce earlier, lay more eggs, and in that way act as a pressure on the caterpillars and get rid of the predators for this tree.
By encouraging the birds to move into the neighborhood, the oaks ensure long-term protection. With each invasion, the buds produce an aromatic call and the birds fly in. Samuel Caro has synthesized the airborne compounds released by the infected oak buds.
We took this aromatic bouquet into the wild, spreading it about the nesting zones where the birds might reproduce. And we saw that in total there were more eggs laid in the zones with artificial aromas, no doubt because they thought there would be a large amount of food 2, 3 or 4 weeks later.
For a long time, science didn't know about the complex links and signals that plants have between each other, but also with insects, birds, and perhaps with mammals. Industrial chemical pesticides were a simple answer, efficient and profitable for getting rid of pests. Today, the continued degradation of soil is bringing agriculture towards finding other solutions.
We can imagine that in the future we can combine the presence of these nesting platforms with alarm scents produced by the trees to strongly attract insect-eating birds, and so act as an integrated biological defense system and avoid the massive use of pesticides.
If plants use several surprisingly efficient strategies of defense above ground, what is going on underground in the roots? The earth is crawling with life. Worms, acari, springtails, centipedes, bacteria, and many other species still yet to be discovered. All of this busy world tirelessly moves between the roots of plants and the mycelium of mushrooms that weave beneath our feet a dense and interwoven network. Fungi appeared 450 million years ago and have colonized all terrestrial and aquatic environments. It's thought that without them, the first plants could not have conquered dry land. Plants and fungi have been partners for a long time.
Here, we have an incredibly diverse range of decomposers, degrading fungi, which represent 40% of the forest's biodiversity. They break down tree trunks, branches, and dead leaves. And thanks to that decomposing activity of degrading, they feed the soil, where the mycorrhizal fungi absorb the elements necessary for tree growth.
Ceps, Amanita muscaria, chanterelles, russulae, girolles, milk-capped fungi, bolles, and many others, because the family of mycorrhizal fungi is large. They are the fruit of underground organisms called mycelia, a network of filaments that explore vast surfaces in search of food. Microbiologist at the French INRAE Research Center, Francis Martin studies how plants benefit from underground ecosystems.
Here we have a very nice cep. It's probably connected via a mycelian system underground to this young oak. Here, it's spectacular. You can see the mycorrhizal root lightly colored red, and then we have one here, orange, probably another mycorrhizal fungus installed on the root system. So this oak is interacting with dozens of different symbiotic fungi, forming mycorrhizal structures with different forms and colors, with probably different functions.
One of the essential functions of these sleeve-like structures is to protect the roots of plants from springtails, roundworms, and other tiny little creatures that seek to eat them. The other function is to weave a dense network of filaments, uniting fungal mycelia and plant roots. This network bond prepares the soil as it contains nutriments necessary for both plants and fungi.
What is surprising is that the health of this forest surrounding us depends on this little structure we call mycorrhiza, symbiosis between plants and fungi.
Through mycorrhiza, fungi supply plants with rare minerals, like phosphorus and nitrogen, which they capture in the soil along with other nutrients. In exchange, the fungi receive sugars from plant photosynthesis, which, not having chlorophyll, they can't make themselves. Laboratory observation by confocal microscope allows us to understand the symbiotic fusion of the mycelium filaments and plant roots.
Here, we're in the soil, the network of mycorrhizal fungi. All these green filaments colonize the whole of the root surface in red and end up by forming a mycorrhiza cap, here in green. Here we can clearly see the fungi filaments which surround the root, forming a kind of sock, and then this network of filaments which penetrate the root and burrow between the cells to the heart of the root.
Through this fusional connection with the mycorrhiza, plants make close and fertile bonds with many fungal mycelia and with very many and varied colonies of bacteria.
In green are the bacteria that jump, twitch, and run along the highways of fungal mycorrhizal filaments.
This allows the bacteria to move a long way, which they couldn't do without the fungus.
The bacterial population that proliferate in the soil are to plants what intestinal microbes are to humans. Two plants have similar relations with the bacteria which surround them as we do to our own.
Soil is like a digestive tube. There is flora in the soil made of microorganisms, and the plant is able to search out and select useful bacteria for itself. Useful especially to improve soil fertility, but also useful to protect itself from diseases and climatic changes.
To appreciate the influence of bacteria on the development of pulses, like for example corn or beans, the French NRI Centre has built an entirely automised experimental platform. Plant development is measured in highly controlled conditions. Lionel Rangard and his team grow corn plots in pots filled with soil where the number and diversity of bacteria is precisely dosed. Through very high-definition cameras, the pockets of bacteria are easy to quantify and qualify in the images.
Here we truly discover the root of the plant. And on that root, if we look closely, we can see little balls called nodes. In these nodes are millions of bacteria, which are raised by the plant. And in return, these bacteria feed the plant because they are capable of capturing atmospheric nitrogen, nitrogen in the air, and transform it in a way that the plant can assimilate it. It's a win-win partnership. The plant feeds the bacteria, and the bacteria feed the plant.
The more variety and quantity of bacteria, the more prosperous the plants. The shape and dimension of the pockets vary according to the type of plant. In the same way that the mycorrhiza secrete hormones to attract fungal mycelia, the root nodes secrete hormones to attract bacteria. Once the bacteria are enclosed in the nodes or capsules of the roots, the plant modifies them. They change shape, grow longer, and their metabolism alters. Instead of feeding on diverse substances, the encapsulated bacteria now only feed on atmospheric nitrogen, which they turn into nitrogen the plant can assimilate as a fertilizer.
At INRA France, we have shown that if the microbial diversity is reduced in the soil, plant development is reduced. We've also shown that if fertilizer is added to the soil where there is less biodiversity, the plant still won't develop as well as it would if there was more biodiversity. So if we compare fertilizer to biodiversity, it's better to have a more biodiversified soil than to add fertilizer. These win-win partnerships between plants and bacteria are already used in agriculture, especially for pulse cultures, and that allows us to bring nitrogen in a natural way and limit the use of chemical fertilizers. In agricultural systems which are poorer, less fertile, notably in Africa, this simply allows agriculture to happen, to develop plants where they couldn't survive before because the soils weren't fertile enough. And one of the first applications is the development of the Great Green Wall in South Sahel, which has allowed a whole zone to be reforested, limiting the expansion of the desert. In the heart of the forest, there are thousands of species of mushrooms interacting with the trees. It's a permanent dialogue. Unfortunately, in the farm just beside it, massive use of pesticides has eliminated all microbial life. The plants are alone and no longer talk. It's completely silent.
For the first time in the history of industrial farming, harvests of cultivated crops have stopped increasing. Confronted with environmental constraints and the limits of selection, our agriculture is at a dead end. A new biological approach offers a new perspective for progress, one that remains to be fully explored.
Hopefully in the future, mycorrhizal symbiosis and nitrogen-fixing symbiosis will be developed by humankind to help plants adapt to climate change.
The discoveries over the past few years have considerably improved our vision of the plant world. The closer we look at them, the more plants become familiar to us. Perhaps one day we'll stop seeing them as objects that can be infinitely cut, exploited, and transformed, and see them for what they are, precious allies without which we would be lost.